Welcome, everybody, to another webinar in the series called Creativity is the Future. We're glad to have you here this evening. Tonight's guest is Darren Kuropatwa, and we'll get into formal introductions in just a moment. This webinar series is for teacher leaders, administrators, trainers, anyone that kind of leads the conversation of integrating more creativity into the classroom practices. We're really focusing on the nature of creativity, its importance, and how we can really grow and foster in the educational setting. If you're unaware of the topics that are coming up, in January we're talking about teaching for creativity in the Common Core classroom. February brings how do you do it? Insights from school administrators. March we have a group of dynamic educators coming together for Ignite Talks. What does creativity in education look like to you? In April, our webinar topic is using digital storytelling as an instructional strategy. And then May, we round out with the future of digital learning. Today's guest speaker is Darren Kuropatwa. How am I doing with that pronunciation, Darren? Doing okay?
You're doing awesome, Coach.
Okay. He's a curriculum coordinator up in Winnipeg. And just to give you a little bit of background, Darren was an early user of blogs, part of his senior math classes. He's gained notoriety for his innovative use of visuals and exploration in using technology to enable students to do things they could not have done otherwise. He's a regular presenter at conferences both nationally and internationally. And today's topic really focuses on who is telling your stories. Shouldn't it be you? How can you share your stories of learning in an already full day? Today, Darren's going to share and explore lightweight digital storytelling ideas and techniques that you can implement in your school tomorrow to document the learning and foster reflective ways for you, your students, and teachers to share what they are learning and what they are doing.
Okay. Hi, folks. As Kelly said, my name is Darren Kuropatwa. I'm here in Winnipeg, Canada. It's a little bit blustery and -5 degrees Celsius, but it's warm inside. And the focus of this talk is kind of, like Kelly said, for school leaders, who's telling your story? What are some ways that you can meaningfully use technology and build relationships with people to tell the story of learning in your school in ways that you can be proud of and that your students can participate in as well? And I was kind of really thinking about this from the administrator's perspective. So a school administrator, the number of things across your desk in the course of a day is innumerable. You often feel like you're running around putting out fires. You plan to do one thing today and you never actually get to it because of, well, I don't need to tell you, all sorts of things happen. Schools are busy places. So how do you manage to focus on your role as an instructional leader in the building, to tell the story of learning in your building in a way that you and your students can participate in, and maybe even your parent communities to be proud of? So that really turns around, I think, the issue of trust. And that's kind of the big fear. When it comes to using social media in the classroom, usually the first thing that concerns people most is, can I trust people to tell the kind of story that I want to tell? If I don't get a chance, and that's the fear with social media, if I don't get a chance to vet what they say before they say it, how do I know that what they're saying isn't actually going to add more fuel to a fire, or maybe start a fire where there wasn't one before? So in thinking about this, kind of looking at some concrete examples, and we'll look at what different administrators in different schools do and how they manage that in effective ways and build a sense of community while doing it. Take a look at this. This is an interesting Twitter account. So the country of Sweden has a Twitter account at Sweden, and what they do is they take a different Swede in the country every week who has both the username and the password to the country's Twitter account, and they tweet on behalf of Sweden. So when I took this screenshot, it was a young lady by the name of Katrina, or Katarina. As of yesterday, or today's Wednesday, so I think it was as of Monday, the fellow who's tweeting on behalf of Sweden is a fellow by the name of Daniel. It was a different woman last week. And it changes every week, a different person. So my question for you, and this is where Kelly's going to bring a poll out onto the screen, is this something that you would do? would you create a Twitter account for your school where you would give the Twitter account, the username and the password, to a different kid in the school each week and let them tweet on behalf of the school? If you're teaching or working or the school administrator, let's say in an early years school, where it really doesn't make sense to give the account to a kid because they're far too young, would you be willing to give it to a parent, a different parent every week to tweet on behalf of the school? And the poll is anonymous, so feel free, be honest. How many of you feel you would and how many feel you wouldn't? So as the results are rolling in, and we've got about 34 people voting so far, it was looking like the yays were winning, and now the no's are coming back. So not quite 50-50. Oh, it is. Look at this, still moving. So it's interesting. It looks like the tide of opinion is changing. So there's a difference of only 2 votes so far between yes and no. So while the percentages 47 and 52 are there, or 48 and 52, that differs by, let's say it's about half and half. So half of you say that you would and half of you say you wouldn't. That's interesting. Kelly, we can take the poll off the screen now. So let me show you another Twitter account. This is Lydon High School. Some of you may know Lydon, and you may know the principal at Lydon. And at Lydon High School, they choose a different student every week to represent the school and tweet on behalf of the school, which kind of gives people an insight into different aspects of the school. One of the things, when I was reading Jason's blog, the principal at the school, when I was reading his blog, and he was talking about one week, there was one kid who shared a tweet. He was on the tweet was, if you see the sunrise while going to school in the morning, then you know you're already late for swim practice. And that really struck me, like what an interesting slice of life for a certain segment of the school community that most people would probably never be aware of. And by having a different student do this every week, you kind of build up a sense of what the character of the school is. You'll notice, if you look at this, that look at the first tweet on the slide. You see getting ready for band night, and then there's a hashtag, Lydon Pride. And so that's another thing that Jason started doing in his school, is he encouraged the use of a hashtag, started himself using it, and then students were using it as well. And I asked him, what's the difference between the hashtag and the Twitter account, and which one felt more comfortable or less comfortable for you? So if you search Twitter for the hashtag Lydon Pride, you're going to find all sorts of tweets from all sorts of kids. People from the principal himself, whichever student is controlling Lydon Pride that week, everybody who's members of that community. And together they build up a sense of what that community is about. The other thing that Jason did at his school, and he's not the only principal to do this, is he started a blog. He called it Lydon Learned 365. He was kind of building on an idea that I believe it was George Couros started with his school, 180 Days of Learning. And basically what he asked is that a different person from the school should write a blog post on this blog, and it could be about anything that's happening in the school. Now, having made the decision to do a blog like this, that there would be one post every single day, Jason also had to make a personal commitment that if no one steps up to do it, then he'd have to do it himself. And one of the things that he told me was he did have to do it 2 or 3 times. He did have to actually write the blog post himself. But after the 11th day, he has never had to post another blog post himself. It's been different members of the school, different students, different teachers, different members of the community. And over time, you begin to see a slice of life. And that creates the story of what this school is about, but not through the single lens of a school administrator or through one teacher or through one group, but actually the entire community. Now, if you want to see that hashtag, you can search Twitter and look for Learn365. Actually, if you go there now, you're probably going to see a bunch of tweets in Chinese. because there's a fella who has made a commitment to learn Chinese by posting to his blog and tweeting once every day a new Chinese word that he has learned. If you scroll down a bit, you'll start to see all the different schools that have created Learn 365 blogs. And many different schools have created blogs now where they're starting to share the learning story or the narrative of what it's like to live and be a member of that school community in each of their different schools. So think about that for your own school. Like, think about very often the fear for a school leader to get involved in using social media to tell the story of their school is scary, because it's a big burden. That's a lot to take on your back. But if you keep in mind that you're not alone in this, keep in mind that that's actually work that you can distribute across the community with other people, then the load gets lighter. And by focusing on learning, so one of the things that I really, really like about this idea is kind of that everybody is learning together in public. And when they write their blog posts, it can be totally selfish. Just write about the stuff that you are personally learning, because it turns out that learning selfishly but publicly is an act of generosity. See, the things that you're interested in learning, the things that each individual may be interested in learning, if the only person that ever knows about it is that person, then perhaps over time it withers, maybe even dies. But if it gets shared in some way, whichever way, you never know who may have a shared interest with you, who might connect with you, who might reply back to you on Twitter or leave a comment on your blog that opens your eyes to learning about that same topic in ways you hadn't conceived of before. So the whole idea about telling your story was also the theme of a blog post that Jason Markey, is his full name, is the principal at Lydon High School. And if you want to quickly get to the blog, the URL is j.mp/tellingyours, and you can read that post where he talks about basically 5 core ideas that have emerged from having used a school hashtag, a school Twitter account that's shared and distributed across different people every week, and starting up that Learning 365 blog. And he's kind of got 5 takeaways from that. So let me quickly run through what those takeaways are. First, it's a long road. If you start doing something, let's say you create a hashtag for your school, and you're kind of looking to see that there's some action on it, that lots of people are engaged with it. What you probably won't see right away is you're probably not going to see a whole lot of action there. As a matter of fact, a friend of mine who's the principal at R.D. Parker Collegiate, so RDPC, he started a hashtag, RDPC Pride, after we had a chat about this. Now his hashtag, which you can also find on Twitter, his hashtag is about, is it 2 months old? Not even, probably not quite 2 months old. 6 weeks. And if you go there, you'll scroll all the way down to the bottom, you'll find the first few tweets actually come from the principal of the school. His name is Rob Fisher. So on Twitter, he's at Rob C. Fisher. He used to be known as Bald Fury. That tells you something about how much hair he's got. But yeah, so Rob was diligent and persistent in building up the school hashtag. If you look at it now, and he's only 6 weeks in, he's getting some buy-in. What struck me was he's getting buy-in not just from kids in the school, and there is some of that, not a lot yet, but he's got the phys ed staff are now tweeting from their Twitter account. And here is the compelling thing. There was an event at the school where the media was invited in. And when the local media was invited in, and they knew that the school had a hashtag, the local media started using the hashtag in the tweets that they were sharing about events at the school. Now, having a Twitter account where a kid can publish something, I guess, if you have to, you can shut down a Twitter account. If you're a school principal, you've probably had to do that at some point or other. If you haven't, maybe it's just that you haven't had to do that yet. Sometimes kids choose to create accounts that we can be less than prideful about, but sometimes things can go wrong. So a kid on Twitter, if they publish something inappropriate, tweet something inappropriate, you can delete, an individual tweet can be deleted. But having a hashtag is a little more scary, because a hashtag is something that anybody can use. A hashtag isn't something you own. You own a Twitter account, you don't own a hashtag. And since anybody can tweet on the hashtag, you never know what someone's going to say, and that's kind of the scary part. So the approach that Jason took in his school is what I would call He doesn't reply with a hard sell or a soft sell. He replies from what I would call a learning stance, a learning approach. And so let's say a kid says something on the hashtag. It's worth your while, if you're going to have a school hashtag, to check it regularly. If you are not a regular Twitter user, or you don't have someone on your admin team or someone part of your school leadership team in one capacity or another who isn't an avid Twitter user who would be willing to kind of let's just check what's happening on the hashtag regularly, then maybe this isn't the way to go, because you do need to check it regularly. And if something untoward comes up in the stream, then just invite the kid in. And there's two things to keep in mind. Have a chat with the kid, and Jason, in that blog post I shared, talks about one occasion where he did have to invite a student into his office because they had tweeted something on the hashtag that really wasn't appropriate. And the first thing that he wanted to make clear to the student was, I'm not following you, I'm following the hashtag. That's how I know about this, because you use the hashtag. It's not because I'm monitoring your Twitter account. There's kind of no big brother aspect to this. The second thing was he called up the hashtag in a search and showed the kid and looked at all the tweets that are shared by other students, tweets that are shared by different teachers in the school, tweets that people elsewhere from around the school community are talking about, Lydon Pride, and said, like, if we look at your tweet, does it really fit with the message that's being shared here, with the conversation that's going on here? And in most, basically what happens is the kid says, well, what can I do? He says, well, if you like, it's your tweet. You could delete it. And that's generally speaking what happens. Now, this issue of following students. So if you're going to have a hashtag and a Twitter account, and students may start following your Twitter account, students may start following you. Should you follow students back? And that, for some, that feels a little bit creepy. Like, who is this guy following the kids? Other principals may reply and not say, not just that it's not creepy, it's like, absolutely follow students. Now, schools that use a school hashtag, schools that have Learn 365 blogs, I know for a fact they fall into two categories. Some will not follow the students. That's a choice that they've made. Others say absolutely follow the students. And that's a personal decision that you have to make. So, because sometimes if you're following students, you've got to be prepared that they may share things that you may not be comfortable with. But it's also, you're not obligated, if you follow the students, you're now not responsible for every single tweet that they make. You're only responsible for what you see when you're there. It's kind of like Twitter, you have to think of as a river. The stream goes by, and when you're there, you can see what happens. When you're not there, then that's gone by and you've missed it. Chris Lehman is the principal of the Science Leadership Academy in Philadelphia. And he is a school principal that does follow students who follow him on all of their open social media accounts. So if kids are following him on Twitter, he'll follow them back on Twitter if they have an open Twitter account. If they have an open Instagram account, they follow him on Instagram, he'll follow them back. Same on Facebook. And I really like this post. You may recall the song, I Always Feel Like Somebody's Watching Me. It's a wicked 70s rock and roll. He says, I always feel like somebody's watching me. And he talks about a time when there was a student who he noticed in his stream was tweeting some dark stuff, like just things that where she was kind of down and things were bothering her. And so because he saw that, he stopped her in the hall one day and says, and the student's name was Delana. And he says, Delana, I saw your tweets and kind of just wanted to have a chat. He didn't say anything amazing to her. He didn't say anything earth-shattering. He said probably stuff that you said to students. Each of you, I'm sure, have had a conversation with your students that I'm looking at Jules' question right now, so that's the cause of my hesitation. I'm going to finish this, Jules, and I'm going to come back to your question. His advice to Delana was, if you focus on the negative, it tends to get more negative. If you focus on positive things in life, they tend to, to beget more positive things. Not earth-shattering advice, but he did. And he got the tweet you see at the top of this post a couple of days later, shaking my head, I hate to admit it, but you were right, Mr. Lehman, staying positive was the right thing to do. And she comes up and catches up with him in his office later, and they have a little hug, and that helps to build a sense of belonging and community amongst the kids, Chris and his students, and Chris and his families in his school. I saw a question in the chat about how does it work cross-platform? And actually, Jules, I'm going to actually get to answering that question a little later. I see there's a specific question about Yik Yak. So I'm trying to scroll up to see. So how does this translate across platforms, Instagram, Facebook, and what about the story that is told on Yik Yak, an anonymous account, an anonymous story? Yeah, so Yik Yak is an interesting one. Yik Yak, again, you've got to make decisions that make sense in your context. I'm going to, a little later in this talk, I'm going to talk about how do we link this all together, because I've really just talked about Twitter so far, and I have to emphasize that's really not the whole story. But Yik Yak, you should know that the owners of Yik Yak allow you, if you contact them and you tell them the geolocation of your school, the longitude and latitude, they can basically black out Yik Yak within the radius of your school grounds, so that at least when the kids are in school, Yik Yak just doesn't work at all. So that's something that you should know about Yik Yak. And like I was just saying, this is not just about Twitter. Twitter is just one avenue, but there are many ways that you can share the school story, and you can interconnect them. So for example, you may have a blog, and when you blog, very often people feel like a blog is like, I got to sit down and type and write some stuff out. But blogging doesn't have to be text. Blogging can be done in images. Blogging can be done in videos. Blogging can be done in audio, using something like Audio Boo or Audio Boom, as they're recently upgraded to. And then once your blog is you publish a blog post, then using a tool like If This Then That, you can have your blog auto tweet. Or if you're publishing pictures on Instagram, you can also have the feed of images off your Instagram account come back on the school blog so that they're displayed there as well. And you can cross-post that to Flickr or to Twitter. The same thing with Facebook posts, and Twitter can go back, or YouTube if you make short videos, and we'll talk about all of these ideas in a little bit. You could even have your tweets change your status updates on Facebook using a tool such as If This Then That. Another, and the fifth kind of outcome of using these kinds of communication tools across a broad spectrum of social media platforms is the sense of community that was built. And what struck me was Jason shares two really powerful stories in his blog post. One is about checking out the hashtag one morning when his phone is just vibrating nonstop, and he sees that a lot of RIP posts, and then it says Lydon Pride. And what he discovered was that a recent graduate had recently passed away in an accident. And the school gathered, basically they gathered around the hashtag, because when I explain hashtags to people that are new to Twitter, the metaphor I use, or the way I describe a hashtag, is think of a hashtag as a campfire. In the same way that when you're camping at night and it's dark, people kind of gather around the campfire to have a conversation. And if it's a large campground, there's different campfires everywhere, people having different conversations around those campfires. Each hashtag is like a campfire for that conversation. And the kids, when one of their alumni passed away very suddenly, they used the hashtag as a campfire to offer support to each other and to gather around it and to gather together as a community. A little later on, they had a school dance, and the kids loved the dance so much they started using the school hashtag to kind of say to the principal, we want to have another school dance. So when he saw that level of engagement amongst the students in the school, he tweeted on the hashtag saying, if this tweet gets enough retweets, we're going to have another dance. Well, the kids went ape with that, and very shortly it had hundreds of retweets, and just as promised, he planned another dance because the kids were asking for it. Now, if you think about it, planning a school dance is a lot of work. But to be able to demonstrate and model that kind of responsiveness to the kids in his community, basically the effect that that had on the school and the school community was to really bring them together, to really make them more and more feel like they were bonded and that they had voice and choice in what was happening in their school building. So a lot of the things that I'm talking about here is they're part of a kind of a longer presentation, usually a full day workshop that I talk about called the Lead Learner. And I'm really interested in what are the things that school leaders do that have a positive impact on student learning. And we know that for teachers, that if there's no sharing, there's no learning, because teaching is fundamentally a sharing activity. So if teachers aren't sharing what they're learning, well, Teachers are sharing what they're learning and what they've learned every single day in their classrooms. But in the same way that if what the good things that are happening in our buildings stay in our buildings, then they don't grow wings. In the same way that the good things that are happening in our classrooms, if they stay in our classrooms, they don't grow wings. Perhaps over time they might even wither. So teachers should be encouraged to share the stories of learning that are emerging from their classrooms and contribute to the story of the school. In the same way, from the leader's perspective, if there's no learning, then there's really no leading. Because there was a study, it's a meta-study, comes out of New Zealand, called the Best Evidence Synthesis. And what they were curious about was, what are the things that school leaders do that most have a positive impact on student learning outcomes? And they looked at 8 different things, and of the 8, 5 things have a direct influence on student learning outcomes. All 5 positively impact student learning. But of the 5 things, 1 was dramatically more effective than anything else. And that one that was more effective than anything else was this. When principals, when school leaders learn alongside and facilitate learning of teachers in their schools, that has a dramatic impact on student learning outcomes. For those of you that understand the math, the effect size is 0.8. So just to give you a sense of that, you know, like the normal curve, an effect size of 1 would basically move a kid from the bottom of the scale to the middle, a kid from the middle to the top. An effect size of 0.8, that's almost 1. That means that all your low kids get pushed way up in student learning outcomes. So if you really want to have a positive impact on student learning in your building, find a way to learn alongside the teachers in your building. Because as Michael Fullan says, when principals learn alongside their teachers, there's no fear of judgment because they see each other as co-learners. That's an incredibly powerful thing to do. Now, in the course of the day of a school administrator or any school leader, department heads even, there are so many demands on your time that as long as you know you've got people that are there, that are participating in professional learning opportunities, then you're kind of happy that those ideas will find their way back into your school. It's really important that you find ways to make time to be there with the teachers and learn alongside them, because the real value of that investment is going to come out of the conversations that you have with them later and afterwards. And in what ways can you as a school leader, because let's be honest, no matter what you do in education, the number of things that you read in a day, the number of new ideas or things that you're exposed to, or you get a clever idea that you want to pursue, you would like an opportunity to develop this, and then sometimes it falls on the cutting room floor just because there's no time. Well, here's a lightweight way that you can make a commitment to learning and model it for the teachers and students and community around your school. What's your personal learning hashtag? So if you're reading a book for your own professional learning now, and you read a pithy quote from that book that strikes you, you should tweet it and include your own personal learning hashtag. You don't have to advertise that you're doing that straight away. In time, people will find that you're doing that. And then people may even engage you around those ideas and push your thinking that way. I know that that's something that I'm doing. Every time I read any book for my own professional learning, there's a couple of different things I do with it. One of the things that I do is I take a picture of the first page in the chapter or the front of the book, and I kind of, after reading each chapter, I very quickly kind of post the picture on Instagram and caption it with my personal takeaways for that particular chapter. I then cross-post, and then from Instagram it tweets, and I cross-post it to Flickr as well. I have a different community following me on Flickr than I do on Instagram, than I do on Twitter. And so I engage in conversation in all those spaces, only when people talk to me. I also use a hashtag for each book, and I kind of check, is anyone else using this hashtag? And so I make a unique hashtag for each book that I read, and I put that in Twitter, and every time I tweet about that particular book, the hashtag is there. So, for example, I was reading Embedded Formative Assessment by Dylan William. So I'm going to put that, it's a horrible title for a book, Embedded Formative Assessment by Dylan William. That's the hashtag that I used on Twitter and on Instagram, and you'll find pictures on Flickr as well. And if you go look at that hashtag, you'll see that there's a whole narrative there and conversation in all of those spaces that I had with people when I was reading that particular book. What is your learning hashtag going to be? If you're using Twitter, if you're already into it, then that might be what, and you've never done anything like that before, that might be something you want to think of. Because what's happened over time is anybody who does engage regularly on social networks, they know that there's really the conversation about the digital divide, offline, online, those are different things. It's not like that. It's a world, in my experience, it's a world that's kind of blended. And you see this was a political cartoon to underscore, that was shared a while back. The author is there at the bottom, Hani Abbas, to counter a growing phenomenon known as Slacktivism. In other words, we read about something horrible on Facebook or something concerning on Facebook, and then we give thumbs up. Everyone gives their likes. So another organization, in order to raise money, tries to make the point that liking isn't helping. And they created a series of images to show that liking isn't helping. And it's to underscore that idea that Slacktivism isn't helping anybody. The subtext to that is what happens online and what happens offline, quote unquote, in real life, are different things. And there's the acronym IRL. Sometimes you see kids using it. What you'll find is that among students, fewer and fewer kids are using the acronym IRL. What you're going to see an increase in is an acronym called, we're moving from IRL, I'm going to just put this in the chat, to AFK, to away from keyboard. That has a different subtext. Usually, there's things I can do on my keyboard that aren't so easy to do on my mobile. So kids respond to something that's said to them. They have their mobile away from keyboard. It says, this is real and that's real. Both sides of the screen is the real world. But I can kind of express myself differently. Anyways, it's the idea of digital dualism, that our offline lives and our online lives are two completely distinct and separate lives. And there's a fellow by the name of Nathan Jurgensen who first coined the term digital dualism. And he makes the point that what we do while connected is inseparable from what we do while disconnected, that each influences the other and has an impact on the other. So if you want to know what you think, like what do you believe about these things, answer these three questions for yourself. First, do you think that the digital world and the physical world are the same thing or different things? If you think digital and physical are exactly the same thing, then your perspective is one of strong augmented reality. There's not a lot of people that believe this, that it's the same world in every way. If you think they're different, I'm with you. I think they're different. And then the question is, do they interact? Do the digital and physical interact, even though they're different worlds? And if you would say no, they don't interact, then you say, well, yeah, there's the digital, there's the physical, and they have nothing to do with each other. That's strong digital dualism. But if you say, well, yes, there's the digital and there's the physical, and yeah, they do have an interaction with each other. Well, do they represent the same reality? That would be mild augmented reality. Or do they represent different realities? That would be mild. I'll be honest, I suffer from mild augmented reality. I think the digital and the physical world are parts of the same world that interact with each other. And you can tell this because when kids have an argument, or sometimes parents have an argument on Facebook, and that spills over into a fight at school or a food fight at school the next day, how is it that the digital and the physical aren't interacting with each other? So coming back to this idea that once you've had the experience of working in social networks and you get an understanding that the digital and the physical aren't the same, there's a word of caution. Because I have to, I'm very leery and I have to apologize. If anybody who isn't a big Twitter user that's in the room listening to this, Twitter, it's not for everybody. Twitter is not the first place to go to start with. And you've probably heard people or know people, or you might be a Twitter user like myself who said, like, Twitter has been one of the most dramatic influences on my professional development. It has made me a better me. It has made me a better educator. I have learned so many amazing things from Twitter. And if you are new to Twitter, or you've never used it, or you've got an account because you went to a workshop and you've never really used it since, and it's been sitting dormant for years, then Twitter might not be your bag. It really is a function of how you think of the internet. So you've heard the conversation of digital immigrants, digital natives. Kind of kids are immigrants, they've grown up with this, and us older folks are the older folks are the immigrants, and the kids are the natives. They grew up with it, but the older folks were kind of late to the party. That's not always true. That's not a good description. Ask yourself this question. When you think of the internet, when you think of online, when you hear that word, do you think of it like a park, like a place where people meet, where they gather to talk, play games, hang out, pass time, engage in conversation, the sorts of things that you might do in a park? Or do you think of it like a toolbox? When you think of the internet or you think of online, do you think of it as, well, there's a number of tools there that I can use to accomplish a specific purpose? I go to the internet, I access the tool. Once I've accessed the tool, I put it back and I'm done. That's the difference in thinking between digital residents and digital visitors. Twitter is very much a digital residence tool. Visitors, people who see the internet as just a tool that they use, often use that tool in mistakes that don't reflect well on them. And I'll show you what I mean by that with an example. How many of you some of you may have seen, may be familiar with this story. Habitat is a furniture company. This company makes and sells furniture. A while back, during the time when Mousavi, who is the leader of the Iranian opposition, during the Mousavi issue, Habitat wanted to advertise that they're going to give £1,000 gift card. It's a company in the UK. They want to give £1,000 gift card to people who would retweet the tweets that they were putting out. So here's the thing. If you're a digital native, or not a digital native, if you're a resident online and you see someone tweeting Mousavi as a hashtag, talking about the political issues in Iran, and then you see what they're trying to do is sell furniture, there's an incongruity there. Like, those ideas, they brush up and rub against each other in ways that are not comfortable. And this was a disaster, a PR disaster for Habitat. Because what they did was they just went to Twitter, they looked at what are the most hot hashtags right now on Twitter without understanding the context in which those hashtags were being used. And they just tried to, use those hashtags to tweet their message about selling furniture. But the incongruity meant that it turned people off. It didn't draw people in. It had the exact opposite effect. Now, a digital resident, someone who was a regular user of Twitter, would say, yeah, don't use the Mousavi hashtag. Someone who sees the internet as a series of tools, and Twitter is just one of them, makes mistakes like this. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Are you a digital resident, or are you a digital visitor? If you're a digital visitor, you may want to look at starting maybe with a blog rather than starting with a digital residence tool like Twitter in the ways that we're talking about. Because Twitter has a positive and a negative side. Good stuff happens there and some not so good stuff here. There's that creepy feeling that sometimes if you're new to it, I don't want a bunch of people following me. That's like, what do you mean? Like someone's behind me watching what I'm doing? That doesn't feel right. There's a famous story. This goes back a little while. Justine Sacco was a marketer. She was in advertising for a large company. IAC was the company at the time. And you can read the tweet there on the screen. She got on a plane. She's from, I think it was Los Angeles, somewhere in the United States, or New York, I guess. She's flying from New York to South Africa. It's a direct flight. No Wi-Fi on the flight, and that's the last tweet that she makes before she gets on the plane. So she had no idea that when she tweeted that, and you can see she has very few followers. At this point, she has 3,000 followers. She had even fewer before she made that tweet. It started a hashtag. Has Justine landed yet? And what happened around that hashtag is people just really, she got lambasted online, really vilified. Now, don't get me wrong. What she said, and by looking through her old Twitter account, she had made some other very unsavory observations and tweets that were just not acceptable. It happened in a course of hours. Her flight, I think, was 12 or 13 hours. By the time she landed, she had already been fired from her job. Her family had been horribly embarrassed. She got off the plane. Her phone started vibrating. Her family was waiting for her shamefacedly, met her, and there she was, very shortly afterwards, she had deleted her Twitter account, etc. And that hashtag is still active. People still have conversations, basically, for people who misuse the internet. And this could be the bad side of Twitter. This is how people kind of misuse it or misappropriate it. And you don't want to be on that side of things. But something to keep in mind, that in the same way that music's not in the piano, learning is not in the device. And usually when I present this live, at this point, I would have music playing. It would be Eric Clapton. You may know the song. It's in the way that you use it. And that's really kind of what you're trying to do, is build a context for the way that you're using social media tools to create, when someone does something untoward, it sticks out like a sore thumb. If you're not participating in the conversation, it's not the case that the conversation is not happening. It is. I mean, if you have never done this, if you've never searched YouTube for your school's name, go ahead and try that. You're going to see all kinds of stuff there. Is it the stuff that you can be proud of? Did you participate in putting it there? Or have you let other people decide what that's going to look like for you? For example, this is another school principal. His name is Andrew Mead. And the way he uses Twitter, he uses a whole network of social media tools, including Twitter, Instagram, blogs, Facebook, and more. So what he does in his school is, you can see how he's got a school hashtag. His school is called George Waters Middle School, and they're here in Winnipeg. So there's the school hashtag. And he found these Post-its left on a locker in his school. So he takes a picture and he publishes it to Instagram, which cross-posts to Twitter, as well as feeds those images into his class blog. And it's hard to read a little bit. It says, "I hope you're having a good day. And if you're not, I'm sorry. Either way, here's a kitten." and there's a picture of the kitten. So, highlight, how do you get a school community where kids randomly do these kinds of things to support each other? And by making sure that you share it, it lets the parent community, the school community, the broader community see some of the good stuff that's happening in your building and get shared across it. I'm kicking myself a little bit, because when I created this slide, this is George Waters Middle School. That's the class blog. And I invite you to visit the blog, and you can see the little icon they have over on the right-hand side. There's it says the 3 levels of sharkdom, because a shark is their school mascot. And inside it says get involved, and then the red says stand up for others, and then the blue circle on the outside says be a philanthropist. And basically those are the themes that the teachers underscore all year, with grade 6 get involved, grade 7 stand up for others, and grade 8 be a philanthropist. It's a middle school. 6, 7, and 8 are the grades that are in that school. So he's got that going on. He uses the blog to communicate with parents. They sign up using a tool called Remind 101, so they know what's going on in the school, etc., and can keep track of events. Every time anything happens in the school, now parents are starting to get engaged in social media and sharing back with the school wonderful stuff that's happening there. Now, early on, I talked about being selfish in your learning. And I mean that. I really think that when you approach learning, you should be very selfish with how you learn. So here's something that I've done for my own professional growth. Years ago, it takes me, I take public transport to go home to work. And when I go home, from the bus stop to my house's front door, that's about a 6-minute walk. And in those 6 minutes, I take out my phone and I think about something that I've learned that day, something that I've read that I don't want to forget. And I take out my phone, I start recording a short video thinking about what I'm thinking. Sometimes I do it in the middle of the day, which is the picture that you're seeing on the screen. I'm going to show you one of those videos in just a moment. And basically try to just take notes for myself. I'm not doing this for anybody else, but I take notes for myself. So, and here's one day I was learning about something called the audience effect, because we were talking about how we might be using that to support student learning in our schools. So I'm going to start that. We won't play the whole video, but we'll just give you a taste, because I want you to see how awful it is. It's called the audience effect. So teachers often wonder, how do we make better students? Other people sometimes ask, or other teachers ask, how do I become a better teacher? It starts really simple. Share. So whatever it is that you're learning. So I'm going to stop it there. If you want to see the whole thing, it's online. That's while walking number 16. There's while walking as a hashtag that I use on Twitter and on YouTube, and you can find it there. I'm going to take the video off screen right now. But you can see, like, I started recording it and I wanted to pause it, but I just kind of recorded it, randomly recording sky and my face, and then I picked it up again and I missed that piece, and that's okay. What I found is sometimes I make these little recordings and I think that what I recorded was, oh, that was a good one. And when I hit publish, I say, oh, that's good. It's going to generate a lot of conversation, and nothing. No one even watches it. And then sometimes I record those videos and I cringe. I'm like, oh, that was really awful. But I hit publish anyway. And frequently the stuff that I think is worst is the stuff that generates the most engagement and conversation amongst people. And what I've learned is I'm a very bad judge of what it is about what I'm learning or what I'm doing that might be of interest to others. So I've learned to just share everything. And my big takeaway from this experience is doing this selfishly. Like, my goal is not to share to learn something for someone else. I'm doing it for me. But I'm committed to doing it in a public way. So for example, like this presentation will find itself on SlideShare, and pretty much every talk I ever do ends up on SlideShare. I share everything, because by sharing it in public spaces, and I've talked a little bit about Instagram and Flickr and Twitter and a blog as well, all of those spaces generate different kinds of conversation about everything that I'm learning, whatever books I'm reading, little videos about things that I'm thinking about, or an experience that I had working with teachers, or whatever it is. Learning selfishly but publicly is an act of generosity, because you never know what's going to be valuable to someone who's living in a different context than you. The app that I use is called Socialcam. Socialcam is not an app that and I publish the videos on that community. It's not a community that I recommend for school. What I like about Socialcam is the video creation tools. It puts the music in the background. It puts that little animated text on the front so that you can see the title of the video and who made it and when. But then I push the video to YouTube, which is baked into the app on Socialcam. And that's really where I engage with people, is on YouTube. And my YouTube channel then tweets that there's a new video. You can set up your YouTube to do the same. Again, Socialcam is great for the mechanics of the tool. I'm not a huge fan of the community flavor there. I would describe it as frequently some of the videos that get shared there aren't awesome. Some of them are. There's some great learning stuff there, but there's some stuff that I would rather stay away from. So kind of to sum up, this is the whole story. There's your comfort zone, and there's where the magic happens. And the stuff that makes you feel like, oh, that's not my bag, I don't know if I could do that kind of thing, that's, if you just try to move, don't do it all, don't do all of this, but pick one thing, try something outside your comfort zone, and make a commitment to learning selfishly, but publicly in that one way, whatever that way is. Start small, and you'll see. Make a commitment to it. Remember, it's a long road, but make a commitment to it that I'm going to keep up with it. I've found that people who start blogging, if you stick with it for 18 months, there's a huge difference in the nature of the community around what you're sharing, as well as the nature of what you're writing and the amount of learning that you're doing with others. But you've got to be selfish. Do it for you. Don't ever do it for someone else. Don't ever worry about publishing for your audience per se. Publish stuff that you need to think through yourself, and that's where the magic happens. So my wrap, as we're hitting about the 50-minute mark, is to encourage you to start telling your story in one way, whatever way works for you. Don't let anybody tell you it has to be Twitter, or it has to be a blog, or it has to be any one thing. You pick the thing that makes sense for you in your context. Be selfish about it, but do that publicly as well, because that's the generous thing to do. That's how we share. And sharing is ultimately what we do as teaching. No sharing, then there's no learning. And remember that if there's no learning as a school leader, that's not being shared, then there isn't really any leading going on either. Thanks. I'll pass it back to Kelly.
Darren, there was a question down below about time and time management as far as when admin can work with staff and students and how they can interact and grow these skills. Can you address that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in the course of an admin's day, you come in at the start of the day and you probably have a plan, and you've probably learned pretty quickly that that plan never really plays out the way you intended. As you've gotten used to the role, the first year in that role, the first year in any new role is horrible, is so much learning going on, and you're just trying to keep your head above water. But you learn to accommodate it in your second year, and in your third year, maybe you innovate. You know that for the things that you think are really important, you're going to make the time to make sure that that thing happens. So my question to you is like this. I know your day is full, and I'm not telling you to do one more thing. This idea of having a learning hashtag, that's something like that's 140 characters less because you got your hashtag. For you to just say, and now with like, I talk to my phone more often than type on my phone. So I can kind of like go off into a corner and I can say, tweet this, hashtag, whatever, and done. And I keep going. So how long did that take me? It can be done as you're getting into your car or when you're in your car just before you start the ignition. Whatever it is. The other thing I would say to you is, I want to remind you about that study, that 0.87 effect size from school leaders that both promote and participate in teacher learning has a 0.8 effect size on student learning outcomes. Now, is learning important to you? Is the student learning in your building important to you? Don't you make time for the things that are important for student learning in your building? Making time to promote and participate alongside your teachers in professional learning can have that kind of impact on student learning in your building. Because teachers begin to see you as a colleague and a pedagogue with whom they can talk through pedagogical ideas. And that's that really leads to the change of teaching and learning in classrooms, and not just in one classroom, but across the school in all classrooms. So I'm not telling you that that's a thing you have to do. And if you hear that, I apologize. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is, as the school leader, every day you make decisions about what's important. So you decide what's important and you act on the things that are important.
Thanks. That's a great response. I like it. Just about a lot of it's making priorities, right?
Yeah, it is.
Nanette asks, Darren, have you ever published or posted something that didn't quite come out the way you intended and maybe hurt or offended someone?
So that hasn't happened to me, actually. I haven't had one of my own blog posts come out that way. And I'll be honest with you, writing is hard for me. That's why I've moved to video, because I don't really write words, I bleed them. so that's hard. I have had students, though, publish stuff on the blog that was untoward. So once a kid was publishing something, he was trying to write in the style of satire, but it came out as insults. And it was directed towards me. And we ended up, instead of deleting his post, I just moved it into draft. We had a chat about it. Very similar to the kind of story that I was telling you about Jason McRae when he was talking about kids who tweet something with the school hashtag that's inappropriate. You kind of sit them down and say, look, in the context of this body of work, does this fit? What do you think we should do about it? And the kids more often than not do the right thing. I'll tell you this, if you ever find yourself in a situation where you've published something that has hurt someone's feelings, where you've inadvertently done that, you know that was never your intention. So my advice to you would be to just say that. Be honest. Say, oh, okay, I can try to see their side. Say, yeah, I see what you're saying. That was not my intention. Here's where I'm coming from. And I have had heated debates on my blog. I can remember one, this goes back many years now. I went back and forth with Miguel Gulen about whether or not kids should be publishing their content online. And he was adamantly against it, and I was adamantly in favor of it. The nature of the debate was passionate but respectful. And I can remember another colleague, Ann Davis, her only comment in the conversation was, "What a model of professional conversation." So my advice to you would be, don't hesitate to publish the stuff you're thinking and learning. And if it ever should happen that way, then approach it in the way that you would like someone to approach you if they were the one who offended you. How would you approach them? Try to, offer the same thing in return. Does that make sense? I hope so.
Yeah, we've got people typing. I'm interested to see what the dialogue brings here.
Yeah.
So there's a couple people talking about bringing this to a college campus. Can you speak to this a little bit?
Yeah. So college campuses are tough because the dynamic in higher education, tertiary education, is very, very different. And this may resonate with those of you who are here from tertiary education. Everyone's kind of out for themselves. Everyone's kind of got like their little fiefdom, their research interest or teaching interest that they protect and make sure that they can teach those courses. And as long as what you other folks are doing don't prevent me from doing what I want to do, we're all good. So it's very hard to coordinate. It makes coordination very difficult, and it can also make it, there's friction sometimes. I'm not saying that that's always true. Don't mistake me. But that is something that comes up a lot in tertiary education. So when I think about it in that context, I'm reminded of a quote by Gandhi: "Be the change you want to see." So don't worry, in the same way that in the way that you approach teaching your courses, you kind of, as long as I'm able to make sure that my students are able to learn this and I'm able to teach this way, start sharing what you're learning in whatever ways. When you're sitting in a departmental meeting and you've been sharing your learning around some topic and someone's engaged you in conversation on Instagram, on Twitter, on Flickr, and you say, and they're expressing a point of view that you hadn't thought of, and the issue comes up in a meeting and you share that, well, gee, that's an interesting insight, where did you get it? And you say, oh, that was a pushback I got on Twitter. That only has to happen a couple of times before people will start asking you about it. So just, don't hunker down and don't hide it. Having like that personal learning hashtag and having your own personal focus being on learning and sharing learning, that has legs and that has a way of spreading. I don't know if that helps, but start small, pick one thing, and start with yourself. Share selfishly and publicly.
So Darren, Nanette brought up the fact that the library board did not even want to make a Facebook account, didn't want to approach Twitter. There's a fear factor. Do you have any tips on overcoming the fear factor?
Well, so there's a couple of things there. And the fear makes sense. But some of the things that I was talking about in this session are worth having in conversation around the meeting table. The other thing to do as well is what you could do. And I don't mean to be insulting. So if this comes across insulting, let me apologize in advance. If you start looking at what other libraries are doing, if you start looking at what other institutions of learning and higher learning are doing with their libraries, what you're going to see is they have a strong Facebook presence, a Twitter presence. Some of them have strong Flickr presences. Some of them have a very well integrated social media presence. It might just be a matter of saying, hey, I stumbled upon this today, and sharing in an email. Here's the link. That's it, without commentary. Saw this, isn't it interesting? There's I can't remember which school it is. There's a library that in order to orient the kids, the new students, and it's a university. Is it Yale, Duke? I can't remember. Anyways, what they do is they create a scavenger hunt where the kids go around with their mobile phones. They got to learn all sorts of different things about the library, but they're also sharing what they're doing on social media. And because they're sharing it on social media, they can aggregate those results. Nowadays, you can take those results and aggregate them into a Google Doc or into a Google spreadsheet and see what people are saying in real time as that stuff is coming in. You could even create an if this, then that recipe that if kids have to take pictures on Instagram, they use a certain hashtag. You can create an if this, then that recipe that will harvest every public Instagram account, that publishes a picture with that hashtag and copies the picture to a Flickr account. And then you can create a slideshow out of it, out of all those pictures. Or you can copy all those Instagram posts to a Google spreadsheet. So it's got a link to everything that was ever shared around that. You can do almost anything you want with that data once it's in a spreadsheet. So these are some of the things that other institutions of higher learning are doing with regard to their libraries. It's worth having a conversation with, well, you know, what do we want? Like, higher learning conversations also have a lot of, there's a big issue about recruiting new students. We want to attract students to our school. So if I've got, you know, a school that's doing this over here and a school that's doing that over there, what's going to look more attractive to the digital residents of today? What do you think we should do? Throw that out as a conversation at meeting. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean to suggest that anything I've said is the answer to your question. It's not. The issue is far more complex than that. But I think the only way you're going to move through this is by talking about it, and these are some things you can do to maybe start a conversation.
I like the idea of doing a little fact finding and finding models that are already working and in place, and bringing that to the table and investigating.
You know, there's a flaw with that argument. Like, that's not a great answer that I gave, because I'll tell you why I think that. It's not a great answer because this is also new. Like, social media, I don't know, was it 2005 or so when it kind of really takes off? Like, if you really think, it's less than 10 years old. Right? Like, we're such children with all this. So, like, not even teenagers, infantile. And so, you know, what's a good or effective way of using this or that? Very often the models don't exist. So the question is, well, what model do you want to be? Because the model started somewhere. Someone was first. Someone set the tone for what this was going to look like. And that might be the other side of the conversation you can have in your institution. There, I felt that. Out of honesty, I felt I had to say that too.
Oh, it's good. It's great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
You bet.
Well, we have kept you a little longer than anticipated. The questions just were kept on coming, so I thought we should address them.
Yeah, there's some really good questions too.
Please keep the conversation going on Twitter and social media. The hashtag is CreateEDU. We love to see hashtags on Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter. Lots of active posts and quotes and resources being posted with that hashtag. Some of the initiatives that we have going on with the Connect Ed initiative and the U.S. Department of Education, please go ahead and visit edx.adobe.com/connected and learn more about how you can get some free software and some free resources for your school. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to see the recording or share the recording later, the link has been posted in the dialog box at telling-your-story.attendees.com. And I think that's it, everybody. We're going to be closing out the room shortly here. Again, Darren, thank you so much for joining us today. It's
Thanks.
been fantastic.
You bet. My pleasure.